Welcome to the ATMA Paradigm. This is a synthesis of science and philosophy presented by Akhandadhi Das. Let me introduce what this series is and who's it for. Well, my name is Akhandadhi. I'm a devotee of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. I was initiated by Srila Prabhupada, our founder, in 1975. And throughout my time in Krishna consciousness, I've been particularly interested in the relationship of our incredible philosophy and modern science. And I'm looking at it in two ways. One is our philosophy helps us to understand our existence in this universe, something that science says or claims to do as well. And what is the crossover? What is the synthesis between how science looks at the world and our own insights from Krishna consciousness? So this series will be exploring that, and I'll show you how we will go about that. Now, who is it for? Well, primarily it is for the devotees of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. But even if you're new to the subject matter, even if you're a fledgling devotee, even if you feel that you don't know all the ins and outs of the Krishna conscious way of life or philosophy, you will still gain from this. Do you need to understand science? No. If you are aware of many scientific subjects, perhaps because of your own background and study and academic achievements, then I hope you'll find this particularly exciting. But even if you don't, I hope that the ideas and the topics that we will explore will be accessible and inspiring for you, particularly to give you a better idea of how the incredible philosophy that we have been provided through the Srimad Bhagavatam actually illuminates all aspects of not just spiritual life, but how it actually illuminates the sciences and how all the different scientific fields can be benefited from gaining from our perspectives. Now, how do you get the most from it? This is a series. Some persons may have logged on today thinking this is a one-off and they just have to sit here for half an hour or so and it'll all be over. Now, I'm afraid this is just the beginning of quite a long journey that we can take together. And the reason for that is that I want to present quite complex ideas in philosophy and science, slowly, bit by bit, in a progression, so that you can really appreciate what the messages are, and you can take those messages, not only apply them for yourself, but perhaps help them in your own outreach and discussions with other people. So we have provided some reading notes, and I wonder how many of you got a chance to look at the notes for this particular talk. And then at the end of each talk, you can go online to the Facebook page and you'll see how to access the reading notes for the next lecture. So let us start today. We are the Atma Paradigm, Part 1, Consciousness. When I say part 1, I mean this and the next 7 talks over the next 7 weeks on Thursdays. So a total of 8 lectures. And today we're talking 1.1. This is what is the Atma Paradigm. Now, essentially the Atma Paradigm is our own way of giving a title to how Krishna consciousness elucidates aspects of our existence in both philosophy and science. Essentially, it's a synthesis of science and philosophy. Now let's look at what we mean by each of those. What do we mean by science? It's a methodology. It is not a body of knowledge. It's defined as an enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of feasible explanations and predictions about the universe. And of course, it involves the actual methodology that goes way back to like the 17th century, which involves observation, measurement, and experiment in order to gain some insight on something, and then formulating, testing, and developing theories and hypotheses. And of course, to submit that to peer review, critique, so that it can be revised and improved over time. And this is part of the hallmark of science. It is not static. It is not a body of knowledge. It is a methodology for trying to build knowledge. And in many ways, it's been one of the most successful methods for building knowledge of the material world, and as I will show you, within particular boundaries. Now, it's to be understood that science models our experience of the world. It doesn't actually tell us what the world is, what it is in actuality. It tells us how we observe it and what we are observing of it. So it's our experience of the world, not its actuality. It establishes evidence, i.e. it has from some observation or from some experiment, we see that such and such happens. That's evidence. And in a legal sense, you can use evidence to try and support a postulation and try and establish a fact. But evidence is not exactly facts. They're two different things. And it's interpreted by a philosophical perspective. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's look at the four big questions of our existence: consciousness, matter, life, and the universe. Science is brilliant at exploring aspects of each of those, but within a very tight boundary. It can tell us something about the workings of our brain and neuroscience, but there are areas beyond what neuroscience can look at in terms of how our psychology works, and particularly our experience and this mystery of consciousness, which of course we're going to be talking a lot about in this particular part one. Even in matter, we can delve into the workings of matter down to the subatomic particles, but there's always aspects beyond which science cannot go in principle, because they are beyond our ability to observe or beyond our ability to experiment on. Similarly in life, we will be looking at that down the road and understanding that there are still so many huge mysteries in what we mean by life. And the universe, yes, we can look deep into the sky, we can try and ascertain what happened long, long ago, but there are boundaries to what can be observed. And the question of what was there at the beginning of the universe, well, we can never go there. We can never put the beginning of this universe in a test tube and observe what happens. So a key point to appreciate is that the scientific method sacrifices scope. It sacrifices the scope of what it can observe and speak about in order to gain clarity within those boundaries, within that red hexagon that I drew. So science does well when it keeps to that ethos. It knows what it can do and sticks to that. And when it is underpinned by maths, we can use it in a great way to predict and to produce technologies. And it also does well when it is supported by good philosophy. Now, what I will suggest is that it does less well when science itself tries to be philosophical. It strays into areas which are the domain of philosophy. And what happens is scientists start to invoke concepts that really they shouldn't be touching. And these sort of concepts don't arise from observation, they don't have a path from cause to effect, and can never be tested or falsified. And you really wonder, what is a scientist doing dealing in concepts that don't fit any of those criteria? Well, let me show you how it works. We've got our four topics. We've got the hexagon, which is the domain of scientific investigation. And we have Mr. Scientist here. So how does he deal? How does science deal with those areas where the question marks are? Those areas beyond what is the domain of science? Well, they start to invoke very strange philosophical ideas. Here they are. Out of nothing, ex nihilo. chance, randomness, the idea of infinity or eternity, magical emergence. You might wonder, where do those fit in? Let's show you. And actually, each of these fit in with each of the topics, but just to really clarify, for instance, the idea that the universe emerged from nothing, from a singularity, which itself seems to have come out of nothing, that the information of this universe comes out of nothing. That's one aspect of using the ex nihilo hypothesis. The idea that somehow or other matter, through its own interactions, through chance interactions, randomness, no cause, nothing has been there to do it, somehow or other matter self-organized itself. And that self-organization, if you give it long enough, if you give it an eternity, then the phrase is, that which seems highly improbable, given long enough, becomes a certainty. Now that is an abuse of applying this idea of infinity or eternity to a postulation, because you can then claim anything. If life is ultimately infinite and eternal, then there are unicorns, fairies, and leprechauns. And the other one was emergent phenomenon. The idea that somehow or other, we can't explain it, but somehow or other the brain produces this incredible thing we call consciousness. No explanation of how that happens, just the statement that it is an epiphenomenon. It is an emergent property. Now, no one can say if these things are right or wrong, because they are hypotheses that cannot be tested, and therefore they have no business being described as science. These ideas have no explanatory value. If you say something happened by chance, is to say it happened, but without any explanation to that. They cannot be examined by science, they cannot be proved, they can't be replicated. They're not part of the scientific method. And in fact, I would suggest that they are anti-science concepts, because they deny cause. If you're saying something comes out of nothing, you're saying there's nothing to look at. It's like the police, move on, there's nothing to see here. And because they deny cause and say that we don't need to explore a cause, they limit our scope of inquiry. They say, okay, we don't need to look at that because we've got it covered. It's by chance. Now that's not how the scientific mind is meant to work. We are meant to delve into those areas we have not explained. So these theories are a real block on the advancement of our knowledge. So when you hear people use these terms, that something comes out of nothing, something has happened by chance interactions, given long enough it will be a certainty, when something is an emergent property, you actually have to say this is not science, absolutely not science. These are philosophical terms at best, but they're not very good ones. They're really stupid kindergarten level of philosophy. And part of the problem is that the world of science, particularly in academia, is divorced from its original connection with philosophical traditions. Traditions that really looked at how to analyze and interpret evidence that was coming up. And unfortunately, what has happened is that scientific evidence is now under the sway of one particular philosophy, if we can call it that, and that is the philosophy of physicalism. Let me explain physicalism. It's the idea that the only thing that exists is physical stuff. Now, I have my assistant Mantri Raj on the Facebook page, and he's just going to ask a little question to you if this is a term, physicalism, that you have heard of already. So click yes or no to that. We're just interested to see if this is something that you're already aware of. But let's talk a little bit more about it. So physicalism, the idea that the only thing that exists is physical stuff. And it's linked to another phrase, materialism. Now, when we talk about materialism, we're not talking about the fact that you like to go shopping or you like to kind of just get lots of nice things. No, materialism in philosophical terms means the only thing that exists is matter. Now, in the past, physicalism and materialism had two slightly different meanings, but really these days they're one and the same, because the idea ultimately is that whatever is matter is physical and can be explored by physics. So that's fine. And there's another word, naturalism, that the world, the natural world is the whole world, there's nothing else. Specifically that there is no additives. It's like your yogurt. It has no additives. And in this case, the additive that they're talking about is that there is nothing supernatural involved in this world. Everything can be explained ultimately back to physics. So what's the justification for this idea, this philosophy? Well, part of it comes out of the scientific method, that the scientific method can examine only the physical. Now, it's perfectly reasonable for scientists to say, well, scientific theories can only look at that which is physical matter. And we cannot look at these other things. So even if you want us to look at, for instance, aspects of consciousness or paranormal things, we can't do that because we have to look at the physical. Now, there's nothing wrong with science saying that it has its purview within the physical. The problem comes when you turn that into a philosophy or even a belief that the only thing that does exist is the physical. That's a step too far. However, some people try to justify this step by saying, well, it's called the argument of causal closure, that only physical causes can produce physical effects. So therefore, we see things happening in this world, they're physical, they must be caused by physical things. And that's their argument. Now, technically there's no justification for that. And you will only be able to explore that if you're willing to look at things that might not be physical causes. But the scientific process said, no, we're not going to do that because we just assume that there are just physical causes. So this is something we're going to look at as we go along. I don't want to spend too much time on the details of this because we will be giving lots of examples that demonstrate the failure of this particular idea of causal closure. And the third idea is parsimony. That means keeping things simple. And so the simplest proposition is that just one type of thing, there's just matter. And I mentioned this word on the screen, ontology. So ontology means the study of reality and states of being. So when we say ontological, we're talking about what does something exist? In what form does it exist? Now, this idea of physicalism is not new. It goes way back. There's even arguments in Vedic times on this. The Greeks argued about it. All through European history it's been argued. And it has been constantly challenged. Some of those challenges are the sort of mind problems. And I just quote a couple of old philosophers here. Leibniz says, physicalism cannot be true because it doesn't offer, there's no possible explanation of perception, thought or sensation, which is his way of trying to talk about consciousness, that consciousness is not explained by physicalism, therefore it cannot be complete or true. Similarly, Schopenhauer, I think, phrased it rather poetically. He says, materialism is the philosophy of the subject, i.e. the person, who forgets to take account of himself or herself. So you can believe in materialism as long as you forget to analyze who are you and what are you? Are you also part of just matter? And we will explore that even further. The other ones are moral problems. And I don't mean moral, are you being nice and good, but in terms of value. Physicalism and materialism leave out value. They can, an example that is often given is, physicalism can analyze what a £20 note is made of, the paper, its print, its ink, etc., etc. But it can't tell you the value of it because that depends on non-physical issues of my willingness to exchange that piece of paper with your goods. So all sorts of aspects of value, moral values, aesthetic values, spiritual values, and many others cannot be included within the physicalism idea. So physicalism cannot be a complete account of reality if you believe that value of moral, aesthetic and spiritual versions exist, which frankly most humans do. Now, Carl Hempel, another philosopher, attacked physicalism like this. He said, okay, when you say only the physical exists, what do you mean? Do you mean everything that exists can be explained by current physics, or if not by current, by future physics? Now, you can take a moment to think how you would answer that. Can everything that exists be explained by current physics? Well, or future physics. And why this is called a dilemma is that there's no good answer to this. Because if you say, well, if you say it can be explained by current physics, then that must mean physicalism is wrong, it's false. Because current physics is known to be incomplete. No physicist will argue that it is a complete picture of reality as it is at the moment. Therefore, you cannot believe that current physics is able to explain all of physicalism. But if you say, no, what we mean is that in the future, when physics is fully developed, then we will be able to explain the whole world in terms of physics. Now that's simply a promise. In which case Hempel said physicalism is trivial. Technically, it's vague and irrelevant, because future physics might include other forms of metaphysical reality. And really, if you're claiming that it will be the physics of the future that will establish physicalism, then you're really in the category of a belief system. And in fact, a rather closed-minded belief system. Because maybe we will only understand the nature of this world and ourselves, our life within it, by having a bigger picture than the physicalist can ever explore. So physicalism ultimately is a closed-minded belief system. And many people have pointed this out. For instance, Alyssa Ney, a philosopher, said, physicalism is an attitude one takes to form one's ontology completely and solely according to what physics says exists. So, it's a limited one. It actually can be, we will show how when it manifests in certain aspects in relation to consciousness and the self and life, it actually can be a rather dangerous, detrimental belief system to follow. But in this particular context, we just want to note how physicalism has become the dominant, indeed only philosophy or belief system allowed to interpret scientific evidence. And that is the big problem that we have with the scientific theories. That they try to look at all their evidence purely on the basis of seeing it in terms of this very narrow belief system, that it must establish that all exists is simply physical matter. And that is causing them so many problems. So much has been left out, so much evidence has to be filtered out of the system because it doesn't fit the conclusions and the interpretation that they want to give. So what we would suggest is science is great at what it does. And here in the ATMA paradigm, we value science. And particularly we value reputable scientific evidence. And in fact, I am going to build a whole picture of reality, a reality that you as devotees may understand from the point of view of the Srimad Bhagavatam. But I am going to build that perspective simply using scientific evidence. Scientific evidence that comes out of reputable universities. It all exists at this moment. We are not against the evidence. We're against the theories. We're against the interpretation. We're against the ideas that this somehow or other scientific evidence proves the non-existence of God or non-existence of anything transcendental, or that consciousness is simply just a product of matter, or that life emerges from matter. So we are against the theories, the interpretation, but we value the science and we value the evidence. And I'd like just to take a moment, and I think Mantri has got another little poll for you. We've given quite a bit of presentation on this key point, that we are eager to see science protected as a methodology in terms of the evidence that it can uncover, but we require it to be interpreted by more than just the one limited, faulty belief system of physicalism. It needs a bigger picture to hold it. So if you've got a moment, look at the poll and just click whether you feel that we have covered that sufficiently or not at all. Thank you very much. Now we move on. Let me just explain how this might work. A synthesis of science and philosophy. We want science to focus on the area of each of these topics: consciousness, matter, life, and the universe. We want it within the areas that it can explore through observation and experimentation. And we want it to produce evidence along those lines. And we believe that it needs help from our philosopher friend to look at those areas beyond the red hexagon. So this is the synthesis of science and philosophy. And it's a bigger picture. We need a bigger box to put these topics in. Science on its own is not big enough. It needs the overall encapsulation of a philosophy, an alternative philosophical framework. And we're suggesting that such a philosophical framework should be based on the insights of Vedic wisdom. I'd like to just mention that when I present the Atma paradigm, I'm not trying to prove the Vedic statements. Actually, they are proof within themselves. However, and I'm not trying to come across to non-devotees that, oh, I'm simply trying to twist evidence into something that fits my religion. No, we're not trying to do that. What we're trying to do is solve these big questions of our existence in a good dialogue and discourse with intelligent people, and showing them that how when you take scientific evidence, when you look at it from the perspective of good philosophical logic, and particularly when you incorporate the insights of Vedic wisdom, then you're actually able to create something which is comprehensive and complete, and which is a real illumination. And it is an illumination where this circle, or this ellipse of the Atma paradigm actually fits within a greater ontological picture. It fits within a bigger picture of reality, beyond this material world, beyond even the aspects where philosophy can try and penetrate. It is part of a greater ontological picture which is supportive of the theological proposition that there is an absolute truth, and we will be looking at what is the nature of that absolute truth. So we are not saying that by looking at science and applying philosophy you can prove the existence of God. We're not saying that. But we are saying that by having a framework which looks at scientific evidence from the point of view of Vedic wisdom, you have a wonderful way of explaining the nature of this world, which is consistent with and supportive of the idea of the theological proposition that there is a supreme personality of Godhead responsible for the interaction and facilitation and manifestation of this world. So, the Atma paradigm, a comprehensive model of existence derived from current scientific evidence developed by sound philosophical principles, and it is consistent with personal experience. Part of the difficulty with the physicalist interpretation, particularly we'll see when it comes to consciousness and life, is that it doesn't match what we really believe to be the case about ourselves and other beings and the nature of life. And as we said, it's part of a greater ontological picture. And we draw on the insights of Vedic wisdom from different sources. Vedanta, primarily. Vedanta is the philosophy of the Upanishads. And the Vedanta Sutras, or Brahma Sutras, encapsulated all the essence of the Upanishads in a way that tried to clarify what each of those Upanishads was referring to and what it all means. However, even the Vedanta Sutras are complicated. So Jiva Goswami explains how the Puranas exist in order to illuminate our understanding of Vedanta Sutras and the Upanishads. So the Puranas actually are even more important in that respect, because they're what accessible, they're what can really tell us how to understand Vedanta philosophy. And particularly, he points out that of all the Puranas, the most important, the one with the clearest understanding, and I apologize for the spelling on the slide, is the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the ripened fruit of all Vedic knowledge. And I think I just want to kind of give a personal appreciation that because of delving into the ideas, the research for the ATMA paradigm, it has really opened my eyes to the Srimad Bhagavatam and to sections of it that perhaps in the past I might have glossed over, and I bet some others have done it as well. You come to the third canto, Kapila Deva is talking about Sankhya philosophy, and you go, yeah, that's all really interesting. When's the next pastime, and does Krishna kill the next demon? Whatever it is. But actually, these are fascinating things. And they're not just armchair philosophy. Sankhya philosophy is really important for us, not just to understand how this world works, but actually it equips us in our own determination and detachment. There's even a verse in the Bhagavatam which explains how Krishna, because he's situated in Sankhya philosophy, is detached from the material energy. So if it works for Krishna, it'll certainly work for us. And we're also drawing on the Yoga Sutras, which have really nice insights in the interaction between consciousness and prakriti, the material energy. Now, on that respect, I've just kind of used one of the Sanskrit terms. And we are going to utilize key Sanskrit terms throughout this. And I do that on purpose, because Sanskrit is a very precise language. And the way that it defines different words is really helpful to us, rather than using, for instance, the word soul, which has so many different meanings to people. But the word Atma is highly precise, the unit of individual consciousness. So whenever these terms come up, we will show you how we are using them, and I hope that you appreciate. And we would like these to become part of the lexicon that human society uses in order to discuss very kind of subtle philosophical principles. Now, just to kind of wrap up a little bit, the four big topics of our existence, as I mentioned earlier, are given in this standard story, that first, out of nothing, or out of the Big Bang, or out of the Big Bang, however it is, matter appears. And then somehow or other matter coalesces to form this universe and its structure of galaxies and solar systems and planets and so on. And on one rocky planet, somehow or other chemicals come together to form life. And that, as life evolves over billions of years, it somehow or other starts to manifest consciousness, of which humans are the pinnacle. That is the standard story. And we're going to look at it from a different order, because the standard story does not really tell us who we are and what we're doing here. We're going to start it differently. We're going to start with consciousness, and by understanding the nature of consciousness, we can then look out at the world and try to understand the world that we are conscious of. It makes no sense to start with matter and then from what we think we believe matter to be to try and fit consciousness into that. That is stupidity as a process. We have to start with the nature of our own consciousness and how we experience matter, and to define matter in those terms. And then when we understand consciousness and its links with matter and its interaction with matter, we may be able to, we are actually then able to explore the phenomenon we call life. And the interesting thing is that in order to understand the universe, we have to understand that it is a facilitation, a provision of environment for life to flourish. So it is foolish again to understand the universe without appreciation of life. And we can't understand life without understanding the connection between consciousness, matter and reality. So in this subject we will be discussing part 1 is delving into consciousness, and that is the subject of the next 7 lectures. There's plenty to talk about. It's a summary really only of what the Atma paradigm has to offer, but I hope that each lecture will be very inspiring for you. After that there will be a part 2 which will delve into matter and reality, which even if you think, well, I don't like physics and things like, oh, you'll find this really interesting. This is the Sankhya philosophy which really explains how you and matter go together. There's a lot of kind of psychological, personal, spiritual benefit in delving into this one. You'll really enjoy part 2. Similarly, I think you'll enjoy part 3. It looks at life, what it is, what it's all about, its origins, proliferation. Yes, we will look at evolution, and we will show that not only is the Darwinian model highly flawed, but actually there is a different way of explaining the appearance and manifestation of species, which is consistent with the Vedas and consistent with the scientific evidence. And we will also spend a little time looking at the universe, its origins, development, and also what's beyond. So here are the talks that we've got lined up for the next 7 weeks. What is consciousness? Qualia. You may have heard or not have heard of that term, but it's the most important word that you'll hear on this course, other than all the Sanskrit. Brain model failure, debunking physicalist theories of the mind, scientific definition of the Atma, direct evidence for the Atma, and the importance of the non-neural self. Why is this important for us? And each of these contains, I hope, nuggets that you will be able to appreciate and utilize in your own discussions with friends, family, newcomers, and amongst the devotees to really understand what is happening in terms of our own consciousness and our relationship with this material world. So at this point, I'd like to now go to the question and answer section. I have to log into Facebook and to see what we've got there. At this moment, I don't see any questions being raised within the comments section. So, I don't know whether to take that as you've all fallen asleep, gone off to watch something else, or that it's all okay. But let me just then conclude with this. The summary of what we have discussed today. Science alone cannot explain reality. It must be linked with good philosophy. And we can build a picture of the truth of our existence, of the nature of this world, from the combination of good scientific evidence and sound philosophical logic based on the insights of the Vedic tradition. Now, in the Atma paradigm, we are not telling you what to believe, what to think. I hope that, particularly from our discussion on how to apply philosophical logic based on the insights of the Vedas and the Bhagavatam, that you will appreciate that this is I suppose, an encouragement for you to how to think about the nature of philosophy and how to develop your own understanding. If you are involved in science in a particular field, I hope that it will show you how you do not need to departmentalize your life. You can be a good scientist and a good devotee, and you can even utilize your scientific background, your research, your study, your know-how, and help us work with other devotee scientists who are building this paradigm and particularly filling in all the little details of it. So that is our summary. May I just finish with one last little story. It is the story of Sherlock Holmes and Watson when they went camping. They went up to the Lake District, they pitched their tent, it was evening, so they decided to turn in for the night. They took rest in their little blankets inside the tent. In the middle of the night, Sherlock Holmes wakes Watson. Says, "Wake up, wake up, wake up." "Oh, what's happening, Holmes?" He said, "I want you to look up and tell me what you see." And Holmes looks up at this and says, "Oh, I see stars." "And what does that tell you?" says Sherlock. "Well, I can see from the position of the moon and the planets that it's probably between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning." "What else?" "Well, I don't see many clouds, so maybe that tells me I'm going to have it'll be good weather later on." "Okay, yeah, what else?" "Well, it tells me I'm just on a little speck, within a big, vast universe." And Holmes says, yeah, that's all wonderful conjecture. But what is the real point? What can we actually know for certain? And Holmes says, "I don't know." And Sherlock says, "The tent's gone." So next week, we are going to look at what we can know for certain. That we are conscious beings. We have to start from what we know for certain. No point conjecturing from any other position. So please join me next week for the ATMA paradigm and what is consciousness. Same time, 6 o'clock on Thursday, the 30th of April. Thank you very much.